Negative space, pretty easy concept, but it's basically the areas in the canvas that have low information density on which the viewer will just glide over in order to reach the next area of high information density. If we have negative space, we also have positive space. And so positive space are the areas in the canvas that have high density of information on which the viewer will generally tend to focus. An image will generally need negative space, meaning it's very, very odd to have an image with so much things going on, you only have positive space. What matters though is to define the right amount and where to locate it, because even though we know we need negative space, or at least we should have most of the time, it doesn't mean that the negative space at the top of your image is not the same as negative space at the bottom of your image. And a lot of negative space is not the same as a little bit of negative space, etc. So this is something we need to sort of navigate in order to take decisions. First, it's good to understand what are like area of low density of information, or like what is negative space concretely speaking, or how can we make negative space? Negative space is basically, as I said, area of low density of information, and low density of information means either blank areas or patterns or low contrast areas. What it means is that basically for blank areas, it can be certain types of sky, like very simple textures, or like sky with very like no clouds whatsoever. Patterns is going to be more like repetitive textures, cast shadows with like patterns, like foliage and stuff like this, or certain types of sky if they have like cirrus and stuff like this, and like very repetitive clouds that are like almost like pattern-like. And low contrast area is basically any area in your image that have cast shadows, or core shadows actually, like shadows cast on them. Because shadow is going to completely, as we'll see in the light part, is that it's going to reduce the amount of information because it's going to reduce the overall contrast, because you don't have highlighted part and dark part, you only have dark part. And if everything is dark, then the area has like lower information because the contrast is lower and you can read less detail basically. So if we look at like blank areas in that case, for instance, with this simple example of a photograph I took where you have the sky is like overcast and kind of like very bright, so you have like almost no information. So it reads as negative space, and you can then focus on the line of the stairs and the greenery around, etc. Here's more regarding patterns. As I said, patterns can be in the sky, but it can also be in the like the foliage and stuff like this. So here we can read the whole area. There's so much vegetation that it starts to read like a pattern because it's actually a very simple thing, and you start focusing on other elements. So for instance, all this area you can sort of bypass because you don't really care, because everything is green and like sort of pattern-like because it's just shrubs and trees. And you start focusing on elements that are a little bit more in terms of contrast visible because of their like less organic shape and more like a pure shape. And also you have this sort of like lines here that is focusing and helping you focus. So once you have stronger elements here, all this that could be like, if considered alone, if you zoom in, it can be like interesting to look at. But in the overall perception of the image, it actually feels like just patterns. And here, with an image of Crimes of the Future from David Cronenberg, you have like this idea of focus on here because you have very low contrast everywhere else. Everything is in the dark. So you can just bypass this element and have a focus on this area. How to create negative space? There's two ways actually of creating negative space, because negative space is really about contrast. So between the positive and negative space. So you can create negative space by emphasizing positive space or by emphasizing negative space. Perception is all about contrast. So yeah, as I said, is if you increase something, the other will be perceived as decreased, even if you didn't touch it. So if I increase positive space, negative space will be decreased, even though I didn't touch the negative space per se, and vice versa. So if I want to emphasize positive space, there's different ways of doing it. I can add details. So I have like already stuff, but if I add details, it means I'm adding an extra layer of information. So it means my eyes will focus more and more on this. And if my eyes focus more and more on that element, it means they will focus less and less on the other elements. So it means that I'm consequently creating negative space elsewhere. I can add elements. So details and elements are the same thing, but at a different scale. Let's say like if I'm adding people, if I'm adding interests, so it's adding elements. I can also use light, to highlight key elements. Maybe my elements are not like getting enough highlight. I'm not having my GAC on it, etc. So I can highlight those elements so that by contrast, the rest of my image will look a little bit darker and less interesting. I can use contrasting colors, so I can like have more saturated colors and use different types of contrast in terms of colors that will help me build interest in there. And basically I can do the opposite of all this in the negative space. So if I remove elements, if I remove details, if I remove lights, if I remove contrasting colors in my negative space, it will emphasize my positive space. What can I do to emphasize my negative space? I can use simpler skies. I can cast shadows on areas. So if I have an area with like a little bit too much interest, I can cast shadow on it in order to lower the interest. I can try to minimize elements or even change them or remove them. I can change the aspect ratio because if I want to have more negative space, it generally means I want to change the aspect ratio. So maybe I need more sky. So I can like change my aspect ratio and have more sky. And that while we have more negative space, I can declutter space in general, which means like the more simple I make things. If I have an area with a lot of things in it and suddenly I remove everything, I just have a plain floor with nothing, this becomes a negative space as well. And basically I can do the opposite of all this in the positive space. So I can like make like a stronger sky. I can like put elements in the scene. I can add elements, etc. So this is how you can emphasize or minimize negative and positive space. The thing is, negative space and positive space are relative and dynamic concepts. So balancing negative space and positive space is about fine-tuning the overall tensions in your canvas in between them. You basically need to choose where can your viewer rest and where should your viewer focus. Any area of positive space is where your viewer will focus. Any area of negative space is where your viewer will rest. And by rest, it doesn't mean stopping, but more than your brain is resting and therefore analyzing and focusing less. So your eyes are gliding over the zone, looking for a new area of interest in positive spaces.